Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. We have a lot to get into today. Hurricane coming up the East Coast, so we're experiencing a lot of rain. Jacob, I think you're out of town this week, so a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with the dogs again this week. Hopefully, they're not going to bark during the recording, so I might have to keep my finger on the mute button there. But yeah, big prayers going out to all of our South Carolina family and down the eastern coast with Hurricane Debbie coming in. We're getting a little bit of rain here where I'm at, but in South Carolina, I've heard it's just sitting there pouring on them. So prayers up there. There is a lot to get into this weekend. Right after we finished recording last week, literally the minute that Tage hopped off the call, wouldn't you know it, DJ Moore got a pretty fat extension. And so we want to jump the gun this week and get ahead before Brandon Ayuk gets traded. If you follow, I think his name's Pretty Ricky is his handle on Twitter. He's a Giants fan. He must be a GM son or something, the way he has all this insider stuff, like with draft picks and trades and stuff. But he said that Ayuk's getting traded, and then today, actual NFL people like Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, Justina Anderson, they're saying that Ayuk is a trade is imminent. So we wanted to jump the gun and say, let's talk about it now, just in case when we get off and like 5 minutes later he gets traded. Let's just go ahead and get into the Ayuk stuff beforehand.
Yeah, no, I mean, Brandon Ayuk is one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL. I would argue he's top five. I think both of us kind of had him in that range when we talked about skill position players. And his talent lends himself to where if he goes to one of these teams he's talked about that is really like wide receiver needy at this point, I'm looking at Pittsburgh, New England, Washington. You could kind of argue that because Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson kind of underperformed a little bit last year. So adding that kind of influx of talent, especially when those three teams have younger quarterbacks than Justin Fields, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels, that's somebody that helps you build around that young quarterback that you want to kind of build the franchise around. So I think he's the needle mover. I think he's worth every penny that he's looking to get paid. And I honestly think, and I know you and me have a little bit of disagreement on this, I think he's going to go for a first round pick. That's the going rate for a wide receiver one. We've seen it with AJ Brown, Stephon Diggs, some of these guys that are due to get paid and they're top of the market. Like if Justin Jefferson had been able to hit the open market, even with his contract extension, I think a team would have maybe paid two first just because he is the best of the best. But again, just kind of getting into the nitty gritty, what are your thoughts on what a trade package might look like? And what team do you think not only is his best fit, but most likely to go to?
Well, I think his best fit has to be the New England Patriots. They really, really need a wide receiver one. They drafted a couple guys this year. That's like it remains to be seen what they can be, right? If you listen to camp reports, they're both doing well, but in camp, everybody does well, right?
Mm-hmm.
The receivers on their roster beforehand, guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, Kendrick Bourne, not really number one guys. So I think he would be excellent there to pair alongside Drake May as he's coming along. This is a quarterback you and I were both very high on in the draft. So I think that'd be a very good fit. I ultimately think he's going to end up in Pittsburgh. That's where all the noise has been. They mentioned New England, like we talked about in Cleveland, and I just don't see Cleveland, right? They paid two different wide receivers, two Alabama wide receivers, mind you, this offseason. So I don't see how that would work out unless they're including Amari Cooper back in a
Mm-hmm.
trade. But I like I think the 49ers are looking to clear room or not have this hanging over their head in the future. If they end up picking Amari Cooper up or Judy up, maybe they want to extend those guys further. Who knows there? But I think he's going to end up with the Steelers, and because of that, because the Inklings are suggesting that he wants to go there, I think the going rate might be lower for Pittsburgh than it is other teams because if he's essentially a free agent at this point, right? He doesn't have a no trade clause. He's still under contract, but if you're negotiating an extension, he's not going to want to go to a team where he's not going to sign an extension, and therefore team's not going to want to trade for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
As much as I would love the Panthers dishing out a one or whatever it takes to get him, if he doesn't want to come play here and he doesn't want to get extended, that's just a waste of resources, right? And so, with all the reporting that he wants to go to Pittsburgh, I think they can afford to pay a little bit less than a one overall. Maybe it's a two and a four or something like that. But I think they really have some control here that we wouldn't normally think of in a trade where a player is still under contract.
Yeah, no, and it may not look as clean as the Stephon Diggs or the AJ Brown trade, where it's like the first and a couple later round picks are kind of thrown in there. It may look something like the Christian McCaffrey deal that John Lynch orchestrated with the Panthers, where it's several kind of day two picks, and the amount of value when you look at the total net package of that trade is comparable to like a first round pick. So whether it's something like that the Steelers or another team that may have a little bit of a leg up in the negotiations because Ayuk wants to be there, may end up playing into their court. So we'll see if Omar Khan is a whiz. It would be a huge offseason, in my opinion, for him if you go from Deontay Johnson to Brandon Ayuk. Nothing against Deontay Johnson. He's going to do great things here in Carolina, did great things in Pittsburgh before. Ayuk's just on a different level. So that would be huge to pair with George Pickens, that offense that is looking to be more run heavy based. And it's just a matter of if Arthur Smith and the quarterbacks they have on that roster can get on the same page. So I think that would definitely make them contenders in the AFC. We talked about them a couple weeks ago, kind of being like kind of that fringe wild card team. That I think would put them in the contention for maybe the AFC North. But I definitely think that they would be kind of one of those dark horse teams that you have to kind of keep an eye out for in the AFC.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is a good segue. We're talking about the AFC West this week, and there are a lot of teams that need a guy like Ayuk. And one of the teams that I think you could still argue does need a guy like that, but they made their best concerted effort to add wide receivers, is the reigning Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. We've seen the receiving core last year. Not deep at all, and still they go out and win a Super Bowl. And so this offseason, they really tried to inject some talent into that room. They're bringing Hollywood Brown in from Arizona, I think on a 1 year deal, right
Mm-hmm.
around 10, 11 million. So decent value there. They trade up in the first round to select Xavier Worthy, the Texas speedster. I think we have some of his stuff here. Yeah, Xavier Worthy, fastest man in combine history. Uh, I don't know if that means he's faster than a guy like Tyreek Hill, but he certainly has the speed, has the jets to get behind defenders, as you see here against some of the Alabama DBs that were drafted highly this year. And then they also made some moves along the margins as well. Brought in Carson Wentz as a backup. I think Chad Henne is retiring, or I think he retired a couple years ago, but still decent backup. They needed some O line stuff. They traded up in the second round and drafted Kingsley Suamataia. I think is how you pronounce that, from BYU. He might play left tackle this year. We don't know. And then the rest of their draft picks, they've been really good at getting guys later to contribute, especially in the past couple Super Bowl runs. I think back against the Eagles, where their entire defensive backfield was basically rookies from the same draft class. So I know Brett Veach knows how to get a lot of hidden gems, so to speak, on the later days of the draft. But I think some of their losses might be more glaring than the additions that they brought in this offseason. But still, it's the Chiefs. It's a super. They just came off of their second Super Bowl. You got to be happy no matter what.
Yeah, no, and when you look at those losses, I personally don't think they're as large as the gains that they had, because when you look at what they did to the wide receiver room, they went, okay, McCole Hardman, he was kind of a speedster. We added him mid-season after did they add him through free agency or did they trade for him with the Jets? I'm trying to remember how they acquired him, but they brought Hardman back. He obviously helped with the Super Bowl victory, but he's not, I think, the wide receiver that Hollywood Brown is in the NFL. And I think Worthy coming out of college is a better prospect than we probably anticipated McCole Hardman several years back. So with those things kind of in mind, when you add not only that kind of speed, but that talent on the perimeter, what you're doing is you're forcing teams that played a lot of man coverage against the Chiefs and had a lot of success doing it against the wide receiver room and the tight ends that were being deployed over the course of last season. You can't do that with these kind of wide receivers. They're going to blow right past you, and you're going to start seeing Mahomes start uncorking bombs. And when you look at completions of 20 plus air yards, the Chiefs were 27th last year. You go back 2 years ago when Mahomes won MVP and they won the first Super Bowl out of the two that they've won the past couple seasons. They ranked 13th after getting rid of Tyreek Hill. When they had Tyreek Hill in that last season, they ranked 11th. So above average typically is what's on par for Mahomes. So adding in these kind of wide receivers adds in that explosive element, and I think will really open up the underneath game with Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice. And I will say I was a little down on this wide receiving core One, because you're adding in two guys that haven't played in the system, and Rashee Rice was dealing with legal issues. But with those legal issues potentially getting pushed the next offseason, there's probably not going to be a suspension here in 2024. It'll be a suspension in 2025. So with that in mind, I really do like kind of the wide receiver room that the Chiefs have. I think they can answer and solve a lot of different problems that they're going to face throughout the season. I think they'll explode onto the scene like they typically do in September. They'll kind of work through some things as the regular season goes on. And then come the playoffs, I mean, this team's always ready with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes at the helm. So I think some of the issues that we see on the defensive side with L'Jarius Sneed being traded away, Willie Gay leaving, Mike Edwards leaving, I think that's going to be mitigated, one, by guys on the defensive line stepping up and coming back. You have a Menahu coming back from his injury. You have George Karlaftis, who looked like he took a step in year 2 and hopefully does it again in year 3. And Felix Anaduke-Uzama out of, was it Kansas State?
It was K-State, yeah.
Kansas State. And he looked explosive, but he was a raw prospect. So if he develops, that defensive line, I think, is going to dictate a lot of what Spagnuolo is able to do. You still have Trent McDuffie on the back end. And again, this is a team that they lost Charvarius Ward several off seasons ago to the 49ers. And then all of a sudden, L'Jarius Sneed came out of nowhere. So you don't know if the Chiefs are going to be able to kind of develop some of these later round cornerbacks that they've picked up. And if they are, then I don't know if they're really going to skip a beat. And as the reigning Super Bowl champions, I think going into this year, they should remain the favorites, because there's nothing that I think has really ultimately changed this all season to say that this isn't one of the best teams in the NFL.
For sure. I agree with everything you said there. Looking at this past season, 7th in defensive DVOA, 8th in offense. So top 10 team all around, excuse me. I believe they were 11th in EPA per play during the regular season, but we know they always turn it up at the end. To me, it's all about these receivers, right? And you talked about how they're going to take the top off defenses and cause stress there. I think they're also going to help guys like Travis Kelce, who, and you mentioned it a little bit, he's getting up there in age, right? He can't be the guy that Mahomes finds 10 to 12 times a game anymore. Again, with the caveat is unless Taylor Swift is in the stadium, he might show out per usual. But I just don't think he is the Travis Kelce we saw 2 years ago, like the Superman, best tight end ever conversation kind of guy. The additions of these receivers, I think, can help with that a ton. And with Andy Reid, I think he's going to find really unique ways to get these guys open. You talk about the defense, and while I do think L'Jarius Sneed is a pretty big loss, like we talked about, I think some of these younger defensive backs that have been able to contribute, guys like Brian Cook, Justin Reed has been really, really good for them over the past couple of years. And they still have a really strong linebacking core with Leo Chenal, Bolton, and Drew Tranquil. I really like what this defense is looking at, like the roster, I mean. And I think this defense has a chance to improve despite the loss of Snead. I know it's going to take some adjustment because they can't just stick him on the receiver one and have McDuffie roam anymore. They're going to have to figure that out. But if some of those younger defensive linemen, like you're talking about, come along and hit the stride, I mean, both of the guys you mentioned were former first round picks over the past couple of seasons. I think they can really improve. And yeah, like there are teams with better rosters, right? I think we can talk about the Niners have a better roster, maybe the Lions, but it's hard when you have Mahomes and Andy Reid to count them out. I think they should be the AFC favorite at the very least, if not the Super Bowl favorite. And as far as floor and ceiling go, the ceiling's a Super Bowl, right? We've seen it happen the past 2 years. We saw it happen like 5 years ago when the run first started. To me, the floor, barring any catastrophic injury, is still winning this division. This is a very bad division. I was telling you before the recording, I didn't really want to talk a ton about this division. It's kind of boring to me because it's the Chiefs and then the rest. But I think that their ceiling, or their floor rather, is still like probably 10, 11 wins winning the division, because since Andy Reid's taken over, they've had less than 10 wins one time. That was back during the Alex Smith era. And they've never been below 10 wins with Patrick Mahomes as the starter. So there's a lot to like with the Chiefs. And I have to be honest, I'd be really surprised if they aren't hosting or in the AFC Championship again next year, because that's what they do when it's Mahomes and Andy Reid.
Yeah, I was up until that last part. I was like, you're selling the Chiefs short. With Patrick Mahomes, they have gone no lower than the AFC Championship game, which is just crazy to think about from a statistics standpoint. And so, honest to goodness, like it's crazy to consider, but I think they have almost like the shortest shortest range of outcomes in this division. And it's like divisional round to Super Bowl. Like they're going to be one of the final teams remaining in the NFL. And it's simply because of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And a team in the division that is trying to kind of replicate some of that. Actually, do you want to jump ahead to the Chargers or just keep it in order of how they finished last year? Because I might be jumping the gun on Harbaugh and Herbert right now.
Let's save Harbaugh for the end. With the recent news about Michigan's stuff, more stuff transpiring there, I think we can save them for the end because I have a good bit to talk about from the college perspective there. But I think we should go in order of how they finished the division last year. That's what we've been doing, and the bottom of the division again, not very good, but the Raiders really surged when Antonio Pierce became the interim head coach, and he did such a good job that they hired him as for the full-time role this offseason. And with him as the addition of getting the interim tag taken off, they also had some interesting additions in free agency and in the draft. Free agency, Christian Wilkins was the big fish they brought in along the interior defensive line. He should really shine with Pierce calling the plays there, or Patrick Graham, excuse me, calling the plays there. Good defensive coordinator, and with Pierce at the helm. They also brought in Gardner Minshew to, I guess, compete for the starting role. Brock Bowers, who was my number 2 overall player in the draft, the tight end from Georgia. Jackson Powers Johnson, the center that everybody wanted, and a couple other guys that can fit in along the offensive line and really help bolster a weaker offensive unit. What was the biggest addition for you to this team, other than Christian Wilkins? Because that's the easy answer, right?
It's got to be Gardner Minshew. I think if anything that gives you a floor as a team. I'm not super excited about this quarterback room. Aiden O'Connell, he doesn't have the most talented arm. He did a really good job at protecting the football. I think when you look at turnover worthy, like throws from quarterbacks, Gardner Minshew ranked 9th in that percentage, where Aiden O'Connell was by guys in the 20s like Patrick Mahomes and other quarterbacks that are really good about not turning the ball over. So that's the plus that you have with O'Connell. I think with Minshew, though, you're going to have somebody that's going to try some of those throws to players like Devontae Adams or Brock Bowers downfield. This is a team that still has Jacoby Myers, and they just drafted Michael Mayer last year. Their offensive line has some good pieces. I think Colton Miller is one of the better left tackles in the NFL. And I think what it really comes down to is I'm not really satisfied or really thrilled with how they've tried to replace Josh Jacobs. And I just don't see Zamir White and Alexander Madison really being the answer there. And for me, it's you really got to play a more balanced approach to give your defense a shot to keep you in games and maybe have some I wouldn't say like explosive plays from the defense, but those turnovers that are going to kind of generate points on the opposite side. And I think that's definitely possible when you have Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins on the defensive line, Jack Jones in the secondary. There's some really interesting pieces here to work with. And these guys balled out for Antonio Pierce last year. It comes down, and this is where I want to kind of show what the Raiders schedule looks like for those who are watching the YouTube broadcast. And it's rough. Like you're going up against the Chargers twice. You play the Ravens, the Browns, the Steelers, the Bengals. The NFC South, I don't think is anything to write home about, but there's just a lot of games on the schedule. You end up having to go to Miami, and it's just like, I don't know if I see this team really pulling out 7, 8, 9 wins. It seems like it's a lot lower on the scale of what's really going to work out for them. And when we've seen guys get hired internally as like the interim coach turned head coach, you have, I think in recent years, the only example really is Freddie Kitchens with the Cleveland Browns, and that didn't work out. And so what I'm worried about is that the offense doesn't really gel. You don't have a lot of production there. And if there's any regression on the defensive side, this is going to be a very long season.
So I hear everything you're saying. By the way, you left off a guaranteed L for them in week 3, the Carolina Panthers.
True.
Panthers guaranteed win there. But Looking at the offense, particularly the run game, they did lose Josh Jacobs, who seasons ago had a phenomenal season, led the league in rushing. Came up a bit short last year, but I think in the aggregate, they're going to be able to replace a good chunk of his production in Zamir White and Alexander Madison. But the other key thing I would look at is number one, they improved the offensive line with Powers Johnson. They also drafted Delmar Glaze from Maryland, I believe. I think he's going to support on the right side, maybe even fight for a starting role there. They also have Andre James, who's a really good center. But the two tight ends that they've drafted highly over the past couple years, Bowers and Michael Mayer, are both good blockers. And in a league where a copycat league where teams are trying to replicate the Chiefs and some of the better teams by employing more 12 personnel, I think that's really going to help in the run game. And off of that, have two guys that can both play inline and Mayer and Bowers, or stretch out wide and play receiver because Bowers is certainly athletic enough and Mayer is able to run routes and has solid hands for sure. I think the diversity of skill set with both of their tight ends is going to help them a lot, or generate more unorthodox looks as opposed to being a traditional like ground and pound offense or anything like that. I am concerned about the quarterback room, just like you are. But I actually like what the defense has been able to do since Pierce took over. He was able to get Jack Jones, a guy that the Patriots, I believe, ended up cutting, but because Pierce was his former, I believe, college coach at Arizona State, had the rapport there, they were able to, or he was able to hit the ground running rather. Once he came to the Raiders, had that phenomenal pick six versus it was the Chargers, I believe, where he had that
Yep.
like reach back pick, housed it. I think the rapport there. I think the addition of Christian Wilkins and hopefully a healthy Tyree Wilson, who, if you remember, he was a top five prospect or maybe top five to top 10 prospect a couple years ago. I remember actually on this pod, you had said from a measurable standpoint, strictly, you preferred him to Aiden Hutchinson, like looking at their measurables stacked up. So he has all the potential in the world. If he's able to come back healthy, and we know how good Max Crosby is, he's a guy that should be able to contend for Defensive Player of the Year, which we'll get to in about a month when we do our expectations. I think the defense has a chance to actually improve. And I guess I'm more or taking the optimistic outlook here because I think if they're able to solidify the offense, like if they know what they are, and if the defense is able to take a step and become a top 10 unit, become maybe like a top 8-ish unit, I think they have a really good chance of coming second in this division because I have little faith in every team, not the Chiefs. So I guess I see more of the hightail outcome for them. The ceiling for me though is still probably 8 or 9 wins. Right, this is not a world beater team, and like you said, that schedule is horrendous. They have to, like you say, the NFC South isn't anything to write home about, but this isn't like the NFC division that they're playing isn't the NFC West. They're going to have to travel to the East Coast twice,
Hmm.
which is losing 2 hours for them. So there's a little bit of stuff there, but I think if they're able to keep playing like they played under Pierce last year, who really galvanized them. Seems like the players really believe in him. I think they are going to be able to shock a couple people or shock the world, really. I am not a fan of they hired Luke Getzey, right, as their
Hmm.
offensive coordinator. That's the only other hang up I have there. He's got to be creative in the ways that he's deploying Bowers and Mayer and Devontae Adams for that matter, because I am just not a huge fan of him at all. I believe there was overlap there when Adams was on the Packers and he was there as well as the
Yep.
quarterbacks coach. So there's a bit of rapport there. But I was not a fan of how he ran offenses in Chicago. So hopefully he figures it out there.
Well, we saw DJ Moore do well last year. I think there was a lot of meat left on the bone by Justin Fields, and it's always weird when it's like a play caller can come in and generate guys getting open, but if it doesn't work in the progression for the quarterback, if he's not seeing it, then it's not going to work. And so this is where Luke Getzey needs to evolve and make sure that Minshew and O'Connell are able to operate the offense that he's implementing. And you have an offseason to do it. And Aiden O'Connell, he's a second-year player. This is the second offensive system he's kind of learning. And then with Minshew, he's always kind of been a journeyman. So you wonder if there's going to be time to kind of figure out and develop rapport and understand some of what's going on. And as a veteran, I expect him to. But this is where it's just you have to worry about that gelling. And there's just a lot of moving pieces on that side to where it's like you start just like looking at it. It's like, yes, obviously they play the AFC North. The NFC South isn't the hardest division in football. You're probably going to win a couple games there. But when the 3 extra games out of the year you're playing because you finished second in your division, you're at Los Angeles, you're at Miami, then you're hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's games like those that are going to be really rough. Like, this isn't like you finish third and fourth in the division and you get to play like the third or fourth best team in some of these divisions. Like, I would much rather play the Seahawks than the Rams personally. And that's just because I don't want to go up against Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay. And so with just those kind of layers into it, it's very easy to see them starting the season 1-6, 1-7. And if the guys aren't believing in the coaching staff, if they don't feel like they're right there on the verge, it just feels like this has the ability to implode very quickly. And at that rate, that's where it's just coaches get jettisoned in the middle of the season. And you could see Antonio Pierce fired halfway through. So I'm not saying that's going to be the case. I think this is going to be a very competitive team. But when this is a quarterback-driven league and there's questions at the offensive play caller position and the quarterback position, I'm a little bit worried, especially when they just lost their best running back in Bell Cal and Josh Jacobs. So a lot of moving pieces for me. I think the defense is going to be good. I think what could end up being an issue from like a DVOA or EPA standpoint when you're looking at some of these advanced metrics is they could be solid through the first 3 quarters. But if the offense isn't able to kind of stay on the field and the defense gets gassed, we could start seeing kind of the efficiency dip because of fourth quarter, just you kind of implode and you can't hold anymore. And we've seen that with the Panthers for years now, where we have been able to field a very competent defense, and they do their job, drive in and drive out. And it gets to a point where you can only hold for so long. And so that's my concern there. If I think, like you said, from a ceiling standpoint, Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, Tyree Wilson, if they just hit the ground running and they can control the pace of the game, this is a team that can win, like you said, 8-9 games, hover around that 500, maybe be in sneaky contention in the wild card hunt. For me, because of a lot of the points that both of us have laid out and just kind of are a little skeptical about, I really think that floor is like 5-6 wins. I think they're going to be really closer to that than they are that 8 and 9.
Yeah, for sure. I can see the case you laid out there. Shout out Sam Darnold for all those defenses having to carry for 3 quarters and then they just can't hold on anymore. That fourth quarter is the straw that broke the camel's back. You mentioned that there are questions at both quarterback and play caller, and that's a big concern there. And I agree. A team that has at least one of those solved for now, right, is the team that came up third in the division, the Denver Broncos. They have Sean Payton. He's their play caller presumptively for the next short while here, and they're trying to figure out the QB spot. They have Jarrett Stidham, who has been with them for a couple years. I believe he was a Raider at some point as well. I think they traded right for Zach Wilson. I
Yep.
think it was a trade. Number
It
2
was like a
overall
sixth
pick.
round pick or something they got for him. That was like the going rate for
Yeah,
backup quarterbacks.
yeah, because that was like the Fields, Kenny Pickett, everybody has been traded this offseason. Mac Jones, that entire draft class, by the way, a little tangent. Other than Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Mac Jones, all traded. So that just goes to show you, no matter how lauded a quarterback class is, right? Usually only one or two of them work out. So fingers crossed that it's Bryson Stroud. But they also tried to solve the QB position by drafting Bo Nix out of Oregon at 12th overall. And I mentioned this following the draft. They are lucky that Penix went 8th overall to take some of the heat off of him because I personally don't think Bo Nix was a first round grade. He was not a top 50 player on my board. But I did tell you at the time when I was watching his stuff, that's a Sean Payton player, right? But I just thought it'd be the second round, not the first round. Point is, they're trying to attack this QB position and get it solved this year. I'm just not sure any of these guys are going to be able to do it. But they brought in a lot of other players too. Troy Franklin, who was Bo Nix's college teammate, receiver from Oregon, really explosive guy, kind of like Quentin Johnston. Like he needs to catch the ball away from his body. Like he needs to work on that. Audric Estime, running back from Notre Dame, your guy, a guy you were really big on. They traded another Jet, John Franklin Myers, along the edge. They brought in a couple veterans on the margin, guys like Josh Reynolds, who I think is a good depth receiver, Levi Wallace, a good depth corner, things of that nature. So they're really retooling quite a bit after losing some of the veterans they had last year to free agency or trades. Russell Wilson is obviously gone, even though I wouldn't call that a massive loss. I think his veteran presence is different from what Stidham Wilson and Nix are going to have this year. They did trade, right, Jerry Jeudy to the Browns.
Yep.
They lose Lloyd Cushenberry, who's one of the better young centers in the league. Josie Jewell, the linebacker, is now a Carolina Panther. And Justin Simmons, who's been one of the better safeties in the league, is still in free agency. So a lot of roster overturn. I think the range of outcomes for the Broncos is going to be interesting this year because a lot of young guys are playing, but it is also Sean Payton who is able to figure things out.
Yeah, this is where I talked about the Chiefs kind of probably having the smallest range of outcomes in terms of how the season plays out. I feel like the Broncos have the widest. And I think it starts at they could maybe make a push, kind of like they did last year to be a 500 team. And I think on the far left side of that distribution, they could end up having like the first overall pick. And that's kind of crazy that it kind of be the worst team to maybe like an average team. And it really is going to come down to what plays out in this quarterback competition. It looks like Jared Stidham will probably start the season. This is a guy that has NFL experience, has played as a starter before in the NFL. And you hope that Bo Nix, like you said, when you watch the film, kind of gave off this kind of Sean Payton quarterback kind of vibe. He's a guy that operates the system, kind of makes the right reads, gets the ball out quick. And you're hoping that with a bunch of, I would say, B-level receivers that you can make it work on offense. You have Cortland Sutton as obviously your X, your number one, kind of go up and grab contested ball guy. And then you have Tim Franklin, who's coming back from injury. Tim Patrick. I don't know why I said it.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm mixing Troy Franklin and Tim Patrick. Tim Patrick's coming off his second ACL tear in as many years. So hopefully he's still got a little bit of juice left in the tank. You have Mims, who they just drafted last year, showed big playability, and then Troy Franklin. And so when you have those guys, they pick up Josh Reynolds in free agency from Detroit. It's a solid supporting cast. It's nothing to write home about, but when you have that many options, maybe you come across as like the Green Bay Packers light, where it's like, okay, we don't necessarily have a true number one, but we have guys that are going to be able to get open, make plays, and keep moving the ball downfield. Then you look at the running back room. Javonte Williams, very solid running back. Like you said, Audric Estime is on that team. He is a bruiser. He is a bell cow. And when you talk about situational football, being in third and short, fourth and short situations, goal line scenarios, you want to have those playmakers who are going to make the defense pay and get those yard or two that you need. And that's the kind of player he is. So when you go to the defensive side, like you said, you listed off a lot of guys on that back end that are no longer a Denver Bronco, and that's Josie Jewell, that's Justin Simmons. I'm trying to remember some of the other guys that they lost. It's not necessarily a defense that's going to be spectacular, but with Vance Joseph being the defensive coordinator, you're hoping in year two they can kind of turn it around because the defensive line has some interesting pieces. You have Jonathan Cooper and Baron Browning, who are very intriguing kind of edge guys that can get after the quarterback when healthy. Then you have Zach Allen in the interior, and they just drafted Jonah Ellis and traded for John Franklin Myers. So in my opinion, the defensive line honestly can probably withstand a lot of stuff, both getting after the quarterback and stopping the run. It's whether or not that back seven outside of Patrick Surtain can kind of gel together. And if you're able to kind of put Patrick Surtain on an island to one side and allow him to take kind of a third of the field away, you can use six other guys dropping back and kind of taking away space and just kind of play scheme football to where you keep everything in front of you and you let the offense kind of work its way downfield. And that's how this team's going to be competitive this year. And I know we talked about last year, the Rams and Buccaneers having a lot of questions, a lot of turnover, and you wonder if they're going to be the same kind of team. And for me, this is kind of the scenario the Broncos are in right now, where they are a team that is not viewed all that well by the market. But I think as long as they can stay healthy, this is a coaching staff that is coming back in year two that I think is going to have a plan. It's just, I don't think there's enough on this team to make them a playoff contender. I don't think they're going to be in the hunt for the wild card. It's a matter of, can you stay around 500? Can you eat a lot of that dead cap you incurred when you cut Russell Wilson? I think it's $85 million that's getting spread out over the next couple years. If you can get past this and in these lean years and then rebuild and revamp the skill position room, revamp that defense, then you start putting yourself in a contention and for the AFC West, for maybe like a playoff run. But that's a long ways away. Like this is we're trying to be as optimistic as possible here, and there's just I don't know if there's a lot. I really don't.
Yeah, I'm with you on all of this stuff right here. I'm looking at their schedule as well, and they got the third place schedule. So they have teams like the Colts, who ended up in third place, which should be an improved team, and the Jets as well, who should also be improved, providing Aaron Rodgers and the other vets can stay healthy on that turf there. So again, not a super easy schedule for them either. I think a lot of what you're saying is they have the kind of the blueprint, or like they're trying to build the foundation of a team that should be competitive for years to come. I just don't think they are there yet. You brought up that this could be like a Packers light situation last year where they had a bunch of young receivers, a quarterback who, despite being in the league for 4 years or 3 years at that point, hadn't played at all. Bo Nix is similar because he was in college for quite a while, so he's a bit on the older side as well. I just think the Packers had a better play caller, and I think
Yep.
the synergy between the young players and the young QB let them hit the ground running. Whereas a lot of these guys are injury prone. I don't want to say injury prone. Veterans that have been injured quite a bit.
Yep.
Even guys like Javante Williams missed a good chunk of time. I think it was 2 years ago. So on offense, I think that Bo Nix, if he's able to operate how Sean Payton wants him to operate, a lot of underneath stuff, a lot of screens, and a lot of play action deep shots, which is what he did in college. He was very, very accurate in college. I believe he led the league in completion percentage. So he knows where to put the ball on some of these kind of schemed up, what we'll call it easy mode plays. That's like screens, play action, stuff of that nature. I just don't see the big play, the upside with Bo Nix there. I don't think he should have been a first rounder. And on defense, I do like a lot of the pieces they have. I think it was last year I said they had one of the better, like sneaky good rotations along the front seven. Lost a couple of guys to injury, like Drew Sanders, who was their rookie last year. Some of the guys didn't show out either. I think that that defensive front seven again can be impressive. It's just going to take Vance Joseph playing or scheming more, like he did in the last, what was it, 4 or 5 weeks, where he wasn't very last on your play caller model or near the bottom. I think he over
Well,
weeks
I
like
mean, he
13
got
through
70
18 he improved.
points. Yeah, he got 70
Yeah,
points
that's
dropped
true.
on him. That's going to impact any model that's accounting for efficiency stats. I think the other thing, and you brought this up, I completely blanked on Drew Sanders. And then I believe they brought in Cody Barton. And I'm not saying that those guys are world beaters, but again, I don't think they're incompetent. So
Right.
there's a lot of like, I wouldn't say like not hope for this team or this franchise. It's just like everything has to go right for you to be a 500 team. And that's asking a lot because injuries are a part of the game. There are some things that don't translate. If Bo Nix isn't ready, is Jared Stidham a quarterback that's going to get you 7, 8 wins in a season? I don't know. We haven't seen him play a full season. So it's just a lot of questions, just like with the Raiders at too many important positions.
Yeah, and I think when we get into the floor and ceiling, I would put it like this. As far as the Raiders versus the Broncos go for me, because we've talked about them kind of similarly, as far as what they can be. I think that the Raiders have a clearer path to success than the Broncos, in my opinion.
Yep.
I think both offenses aren't going to be super great, but when I look at the defenses, especially last year, and I know defense is volatile year to year, but both of them are retaining their coordinators and a good chunk of their defensive players. Last year, the Raiders in defensive DVOA, eighth for the season, right behind the Chiefs. The Broncos, 30th. And granted, they
Mhm.
did get a 70 piece hung on them. So that is going to skew things a little bit there. But even defensive EPA per play. Yeah, per play. Raiders ninth. And then Broncos were 25th. And so
Yep.
I think if they're able to, even if they return players to injury, even if they're able to get a lot of production from some of the younger players like Jonah Ellis out of Utah, the corner from Mizzou, Chris Abrams Drain. I think he's a nickel corner. If they're able to get stuff out of them, I just don't think they're going to be as strong as a Raiders defense, especially with a stout D line like they have and a creative play caller in Patrick Graham and a defensive minded head coach in Pierce. For me, I think they're just going to be a step below the Raiders there, and for me, that's why I have them having a bit of a lower floor. We talked about that this could be a team that ends up with that first overall pick, and even though last year we both got burned with thinking the Rams and the Buccaneers were going to be bad, and they ended up being pretty good, I also trust the roster that the Buccaneers had, and Sean McVay. I'll never doubt Sean McVay ever again. I have him as my second best head coach for a reason. I just don't see that with this squad. I don't think Sean Payton is as creative as he used to be, or he may not be as bought in. I've listened to the Athletic Football Show, and they made a point, I believe, when they were talking about the AFC West, that Sean Payton in one of his pressers, it looked like he had just been beaten by 70 points. Instead of being like upbeat and having a camp presser like everybody else is having, he looked like he was going through it a little bit. So I'm not sure if he has the energy there to like fully devote to this team. Maybe if they had listened to you, the Chargers had listened to you rather, and cut Staley a year early, he could be coaching the next team we'll talk about. But that has sailed away. I think they're going to be their floor is really, really bad, and I think their ceiling is similar to like the Raiders, but a little bit below, like maybe 7, 8 wins.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this is just counting on that you have, I think, a little bit more continuity from the front office and coaching standpoint. I think there is a vision with how they're looking to rebuild the team. There's not so much a vision with the Raiders at the quarterback position, and that I think is a
Right.
little bit worrisome. So I will give the Broncos kind of like some points there. The ultimate thing when you're looking at kind of this team and where do they go from here, it's can they make sure that they aren't putting themselves in bad situations, because we saw so much during the Sean Payton era, especially with Mickey Loomis, that they put themselves in cap hell multiple times. And you're wondering already as they get out of this, are they going to continue doing dumber deals and trying to chase a playoff appearance rather than building this the right way? So I am excited with how they are laying the foundation. We'll see if Bo Nix is the answer. I don't know if he's really got that big play ability, something that we talked about with Aiden O'Connell. But overall, the team that I think has the most upside in terms of like this division moving forward, it isn't the Broncos, isn't the Raiders, despite all the talent, despite us thinking that these are still teams that in that 500 range. I think it's that Harbaugh and Herbert connection. And I know you wanted to talk about Harbaugh for a little bit before we get into it. So I think talking about the bad and then getting to the good is a good way to kind of end this division breakdown.
Yeah, you always want the bad news first, to get the good news later. Real quick to finish the Broncos, you said the Sean Payton's been in situations where the front office hasn't made the best decisions, or front office and ownership. Before he got there, we also saw the same thing with the Broncos' new ownership and front office. So
Yeah.
that there's a little bit of gray clouds looming over there that he might be in a similar situation. But I hope actually I don't hope it turns out for the best, because I'm still bitter about Super Bowl 50. So I hope the Broncos continue to stay bad. But as far as the Chargers go, when Jim Harbaugh was hired, it was like, oh, finally he's returning to the NFL. This should be a great pairing with him and Justin Herbert. He's getting his old band back together with Greg Roman, bringing Jesse Mentor along. But he's been trying to get to the NFL for a couple off seasons now, 3 to be exact. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of the stuff that's come to light regarding the Michigan uh, we'll call it sign stealing scandal. More stuff has come out this week that the guy Connor Stallions, who was the quote mastermind behind it all, had gone to quite a few more games than originally led on. There are deleted texts between now head coach Sharon Moore and him. There have been hard drives that have been scrubbed regarding assumedly different formations and play calls for teams that this guy had gone to and spied upon and did all that kind of stuff. It's like a modern day Spygate, essentially, at the college level. And once that stuff started happening, and it's alleged to have happened for 3 years, Harbaugh's record in college football skyrocketed. He was 49-26 before that happened at Michigan. After, he was 40-3 with a an undefeated run this past year, leading to a national championship. I don't want to take any credit away from Harbaugh, because he did help turn that program around from the Rich Rodriguez days. But I mean, if they're cheating, and that was a big part of the success recently, is he going to be able to bring that level of success to the NFL, where stuff like that is not only going to be not allowed, there's just going to be a lot more eyes on it, and it's going to be much more scrutinized. So we saw it happen to the Patriots and Belichick. They were treating him like the devil for like 3 or 4 years after that stuff came out. So hopefully none of that continues there. Hopefully they're able to resolve that kind of stuff at the college level, whether it be recruiting sanctions or vacated wins or anything like that. But we're on to the NFL. He's in the NFL now as the head coach of the Chargers. I really like the pairing there with him and Herbert. Herbert is a young star QB. I think he's just been beleaguered by bad coaching at like bad head coach. He's had two head coaches before this, right? I think
Yeah.
his rookie year it was I can't recall. Was it Anthony
Wasn't
Lynn?
I think it might have been Anthony Lynn, and you had Shane Steichen as the OC, if I remember
Yes.
correctly. Yeah.
So two not the best head coaches, we'll say. Brandon, I know you have your qualms about Brandon Staley, but hopefully he's in a better situation this year with Harbaugh as the head coach, Greg Roman, who has a lot of familiarity, and as Panthers fans, we know how valuable that familiarity can be on the offensive side of the football, following the superstar coaching staff last year. And he brought Jesse Mentor along with him, who was the defensive coordinator for Michigan, led one of the best defenses in college football, and the record or the track record for Jim Harbaugh defensive coordinators at Michigan has turned out well. Looking at Mike McDonald with the Ravens now in Seattle, so a lot of he knows what he's doing with his coaching staff, and they've made a lot of good. Or let me rephrase it. They've made a lot of sensible player additions this offseason, looking to build toward the future rather than going all in right now. And I think the biggest example of that was the number 5 overall pick, where they went with Joe Alt, the tackle from Notre Dame, instead of the superstar receivers in Malik Neighbors and Odunze. And while it was scrutinized at the time, I think it's the right thing to do because Herbert has been dealing with a lot of injury in his young career. And if you can build that great wall in front of him, which is what it looks like it's going to be, and keep him upright, I think that's going to serve them more than having a dynamic receiver immediately. It's the Joe Burrow, Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase meme just a couple years later.
And the Bengals have been in the Super Bowl, and the Lions haven't been yet. But that's
But
besides the
whose
point.
roster is better, would you say, right now?
That's a hard one. That is a really hard one. I definitely think the Lions are a more complete team. I think part of that is also they got a lot of draft capital from the Matthew Stafford trade. So it's a lot of parsing out the do to figure out how you got to the state of their rosters right now. I think they're both like probably arguably in that top 10 position in terms of like when you look at the roster talent and depth. But we're talking about two teams that are not the Chargers. And the key, I think, with the Chargers is they know who they are. The two teams we've talked about prior. Yes, the Broncos, they're kind of showing some outlines of how they want to build this, but it's really rough. They don't have draft capital or cap space to kind of really lean into it. And with the case of the Raiders, you love some of the additions. You just wonder how it's all going to add up. It's like when they traded for Devontae Adams. It's like, okay, that's great, but who's the quarterback that's throwing it to them? And they're still trying to figure that out. You go to the Chargers, there's an identity. Jim Harbaugh has been shown with John Harbaugh a bunch. He is well connected and knows a lot of people in the Ravens front office. And they bring over Joe Hortez, who probably is familiar with Greg Roman during his days in Baltimore. And so you bring a lot of continuity, guys who are on the same page, who know how to go about building a team the right way. And I think you let it off right. That building inside out is sometimes the best thing to do, especially when you already have that franchise quarterback. And when you look at that offensive line, you can see that they have this personality and identity to just punch you in the mouth. They bring over Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, guys that are bigger backs than the guy that they had before in Austin Eckler. They bring in some guys on the perimeter that have a little bit of speed in DJ Chark, have some separation qualities in a guy like Ladd McConkey. You're obviously still reeling from the pick of Quentin Johnston last year, but I think their whole identity is, okay, we can run the ball. And when we run the ball, it's going to be punching you in the mouth. And they're okay with that. And Justin Herbert, knowing his arm, knowing his skill set, knows that, hey, when we drop back the pass, we're going to have some stuff designed to where we're going to have guys running in space. And we saw this with Greg Roman in San Francisco back in the day when he was with Jim Harbaugh. And then we saw this with Greg Roman, even with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. And what I love about it is, yes, we've seen the mobile quarterback kind of wrinkle into Greg Roman's offense with Colin Kaepernick and Lamar Jackson. But we've also seen him take just an athletic quarterback and allow him to operate within the system with a guy like Alex Smith and now a guy like Justin Herbert. So I'm really excited about how the offense is going to shape up. I think this is going to be an offense that is better than people expect because this is a offense that's lost Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, some of these bigger names, but they've replaced those guys with guys like Hayden Hurst, Will Dissly. Like you said, you drafted Joe Alt. You are getting bigger to where you can't get bullied as much. You're the bully. And I think that's going to kind of ooze over into how they build the defense in the coming years. They retain Joey Bosa. They keep Khalil Mack. They have Derwin James. Outside of that, it's bare bones. And so Jesse Minter, I think if he wants to make a name for himself going college to the pros, he's going to have to do it like Mike McDonald. Take a year or two to kind of build a system, get guys on the same page. And then when you start adding talent in, kind of like the Ravens did with a Kyle Hamilton, a Roquan Smith, then you take a defense that is trying to fight to just be average or just above that kind of like bottom third of the NFL to now talking about a defense that's above average, maybe top 10. And that paired with the fact that you have a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback in Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh, who is a leader of men. Obviously, there's some scandals going on with his stuff at Michigan, but we saw his record in the NFL. We saw his record in the collegiate level. And you just wonder if just that element of being a winner and knowing what it takes to win, if them having this core principle of who they are as a team is what's going to propel them to that future.
Yes, that's my answer to everything you said is yes. You talk about Joe Hortez and some of the guys he brought over, like Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins. Also brought over Bradley Bozeman, who's the
Yep.
Ravens center before he was with Carolina. Brought over Hayden Hurst, who was drafted by the Ravens. I think that was the
Yep.
same draft as Mark
Andrews.
Andrews.
Yeah.
They also draft Junior Colson, who was at Michigan with both Harbaugh and Jesse Minter. So a lot of familiarity. They really, really know what they're doing. You mentioned DJ Chark. He's hit or miss. You know, we've lived that out this year. But I think Lad McConkey is a really good addition as well. He should operate really well underneath a. I'm doing air quotes. You can't see it. Sneaky athletic receiver there. And if Quentin Johnston can hit the jugs machine, he's going to be a dangerous like crossers yak guy because at TCU. And Harbaugh knows this firsthand because they played them in that playoff game where he had that, I think it was like a 70-yard touchdown that cooked him. He knows what Johnston is capable of. And if he can get him back to that level, just doing more fundamental things and using his athletic ability to get big gains, I think he's going to be a very valuable player for them. And then when I look at the losses and some of the guys you mentioned, it reminds me of our discussion with Bruce Nolan and the Buffalo Bills, where you're seeing guys like, oh, they're losing Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, Kenneth Murray, Gerald Everett, Eric Kendricks. I'm leaving Keenan Allen out of this because he's still a good player, but so was Stephon Diggs for half the year last year. These losses are more losses in name than they were particularly in player and talent. Keenan Allen aside, because phenomenal year. I think getting younger and getting stronger up front, like you're saying, building inside out, is absolutely, excuse me, the way that they should be doing this. I also think that the defense, some of the defensive continuity, getting Joey Bosa, didn't he take a pay cut this
Yeah.
past offseason to give them some more
He
money?
did.
That's huge, right? Like,
It
when do
is.
players like getting paid top of the market deals just do that out of the blue to help the team? Like, I think that's really big for them. I think, like you're saying, it's going to take a couple years for that defense to come around, kind of like how the Ravens were. But if they can get this to be like not a ground and pound, not a like super heavy run offense, but run the ball with that strong O line, protect Herbert, build play action stuff, use guys like Chark, like Quentin Johnston downfield, operate underneath with some guys. Use Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst in the intermediate area, both underrated like seam runner guys. I think this team has a really good chance in a couple years of challenging the Chiefs. No one's challenged the Chiefs since Mahomes been in the league. We thought the Chargers might when Herbert was ascending, but things happened, injuries of that nature. I think with Harbaugh, who is a winner, I don't want to take anything away from him. He's won at the NFL level, at the collegiate level. I believe he has the fourth highest win percentage in NFL history during his time back with the Niners.
Yeah.
He knows how to get it done, and if they can continue to build this way, which I think they're doing the right way with the new GM from the Ravens, who the Ravens are a good model to build from. I think they're going to be really, really good in a couple years. My thing is this: I don't see as a top 10 unit like I saw with the Raiders. I thought the Raiders defense can really carry them through games this year. But as far as floor and ceiling goes, I think the ceiling for this Chargers team is if things go right, if the offense really hums and protects Herbert and they're able to mesh some of the receiving weapons they have and Herbert's able to be Herbert, the offense should or not should, could be top 10, should be second best in the division, like at the least. And I think that's their ceiling, getting second in the division. I think they could also bottom out, maybe not get that first overall pick like the Broncos, but could take a year, right? This defense is still not a very good defense. Like you said, besides the two edge rushers, and Khalil Mack is getting up there, and Derwin James, who's been more of a name than a player since his draft, or since his rookie year, rather, if that takes a while to come along, I could also see them being closer to the bottom, which is why I have them at third in the division right now, with it being Chiefs, Raiders, Chargers, Broncos. I just think they're way better than the Broncos, and I just see more of a path for the Raiders to get that too. And then you can't challenge the Chiefs at one.
Yeah, no, this is how you got to lay it out. This is how you have to fix that mess that Brandon Staley and Tom Chalusco fixed. I left. I
They didn't
can't
fix
get fixed
anything.
and left. Yeah, they left a mess, and now Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortez and the Chargers coaching staff and front office is trying to rectify the mess that was left. And I think they're doing a good job about it. I think they're putting themselves in a position to be competitive moving forward. They did some smart things that are going to help them lean out and allow them to add talent. We talk about teams trading for Brandon Ayuk. I think they're going to be in a position here soon to where they can go out and trade for a guy. So maybe CD Lamb next offseason becomes available, or another star wide receiver. And you go, okay, hey, we have the offensive line, we have the infrastructure. Let's go send draft capital and go get our guy and then fill out the roster on defense and we'll be set. So I don't know exactly the direction they're going to go. Overall, I think their ceiling is kind of that 8-9 wins that we've been talking about for the other teams. And I think the floor is probably around 6. As long as Herbert doesn't get hurt, he is dealing with a plantar fasciitis issue that may kind of sideline him until week 1 of the regular season. We've seen how undisclosed foot injuries Ron Rivera can lead to misinformation and hope around a fan base that ends up having an injury with larger implications and sidelining for the rest of the season. If that ends up being the case, I think the Chargers just being devoid of talent and not having a capable backup on the roster could very much be in play for a top 5 pick. But that's only that much better because when Herbert is back and healthy, you're adding yet again another talented player to this roster as you're rebuilding. So I don't think a lot of high expectations for them. The way I see the division playing out, obviously Chiefs win it. Chargers are second. I think the Broncos do take third. And then again, the Raiders at that quarterback position and Luke Getsy at offensive play, their coordinator, I don't have a lot of faith in. I really don't. So I don't know how you see the division playing out, but that's kind of how I see the muck or the mess, so to speak, from 2 through 4. No one's going to challenge the Chiefs, barring like a Mahomes freak injury or just. I even then I don't see Andy Reid and the Chiefs losing more than 7 games. Yeah, they would definitely win like a min of 10 games. So I'm rambling now, but yeah, that's just kind of how I see the AFC West.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think after the Chiefs, every other team is playing with house money. I think you could arrange them in any order, and I don't think anybody would get super, super mad there unless you're a fan of one of those teams. I think, like we've been talking about, their ceilings are really, really similar, right? Maybe 9-ish wins on a good day, 8 to 7 wins, and all their floors are pretty low. I think the Broncos do have the lowest floor, though. A couple of notes that I wanted to hit on. Tom Telesco, you mentioned, he's the GM of the Raiders now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how he pulled that off. I'm not sure how the Raiders saw what his track record has been and said that's a guy we need. And I think the previous interim GM was liked in the building, but they didn't decide to go with him. So that was a shocking one there. And oh yeah, the foot injury with Herbert. That is something that us Panthers fans know all too well. And we talked about him maybe being iffy for week 1. They come to Carolina week 2. That is our home opener, and the Panthers are 6-1 all time against the Chargers. And if that lingers, that could easily go to 7-1 there. So those were the only 2 things I really wanted to throw out there. I think we're in perfect takes territory, unless we have anything else we want to add with these teams. And I kind of alluded to this earlier with maybe some Sean Payton disinterest or not being fully locked in on the team. I am not high on the Broncos. I think I've made that clear. And my take is that Sean Payton will not be the Denver Broncos head coach this time next season. Maybe we do it a little bit earlier in the offseason because I don't think a head coach would retire or get fired this late into the offseason, right? Because we're in training camp right now. Preseason's already started. The Panthers kick off like official preseason in 2 days.
Yep.
So it wouldn't be this late into the season, but if Sean Payton's not fully locked in, not fully bought in, I should say, and the team suffers like we've talked about, it could happen if the defense doesn't take a step, if there are injuries, if none of those three QBs really make their mark and perform at an adequate level, I could really see him saying, "Hey, broadcasting life wasn't so bad, and maybe I should have waited for the Chargers, but I'm out of here," basically. And I could see that happening. And then again, they could surprise us and be second in the division too, with how this division stacks up, and he has some pretty good job security. So who knows? But that is my take.
Yeah, this is the biggest wild card because you're right. He does not look like he's locked in right now. And I think when he has been locked in, going back to last season or his couple like last seasons in New Orleans when Drew Brees was in on the team, he made it work. He turned a mess into like an average offense. And so if he can continue doing that, I think there's definitely the ability to kind of stay in contention with the rest of the pack in the AFC West. But yeah, I think that's a good take. I would love to see him kind of rebuild Denver. Not because I like the Broncos, but just because it is cool when you see a coach kind of takes like a mess of something and turn it into something. And that's always cool. How it felt with Mike McDaniel in Miami, even though he was taking over a winning team, that they had no juice on offense, and all of a sudden they trade for Tyreek Hill, and then there's fireworks. So I'm rambling now. That's been a theme this episode, but my perfect take is I think Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, and Justin Herbert, they lead an above average offense in terms of EPA or DVOA this year. I think they're going to play very smart, fundamental football. And it's just going to be hard for defenses to dictate things when you have guys like Joe Alt and why am I blanking out on their left tackle? This is
Rashawn Slater.
Tore his bicep a couple years ago. Rashawn Slater's great. You have a couple other guys on the interior. I think Trey Pipkin and a few other guys, like you talked about, Bradley Bozeman, they brought in to be the center. So definitely going to be running a lot of power football, and it's going to be fun to see. So that's kind of where we see Purrfect Takes playing out this fall, heading into next year. Next week, we stay in the West Coast. We will be covering the NFC West with Jack Perotti with Bet-R. And then we'll be coming down the home stretch to the AFC South and NFC South. So we were supposed to have a special guest for you guys, Robbie the Day. He unfortunately had some things come up and was not able to kind of talk about the AFC West and his opinion and his perspective on it. But we definitely do want to have him on either before or after the Broncos game this season. So you'll probably be getting to meet him then. Until next week, we will catch you guys. If you have any questions, shoot them to us at Purrfect_Takes, and we'll catch you then.